AV Experience. I'm your host, Ryan Charpentier from Ascend AV. I'm joined this week by the long-haired and beautiful Peter Aylett from he keeps adding titles, but he only has 2 next to his name this week. From Officina Acustica and Cinema Bureau. You have been a busy man. You're finishing up some stuff with some theaters that we really can't necessarily talk about, but you've
We
been
will be able
excited about them. You will be able to.
we will be able to.
Okay. That's exciting.
The big
Um,
one we finished that is arguably as good as any private cinema on the planet, we think. We have almost 100% publicity rights on. We can't reveal who the client is. We can't reveal exactly where it is, but we will be allowed to talk about it.
that's good
So
for you because that's not always the
I can
case.
see a series of case studies coming on.
Good. Awesome. Because that's, like I said, that's not always the case. So it's exciting when you can actually talk about some of the work that you've done, especially
So
with the
true.
amount of time that you guys have put into this, because it's substantial and the room
Yeah.
is substantial. Um,
I've done a lot of projects in palaces where you have to register your electronic devices. You then have to go through security. You have to put your bag through an X-ray. You go through a metal detector. They pat you down, and you then have a piece of tape put over your mobile and your laptop camera. And
mhm.
if on site you are seen with that tape removed from your device, you are ejected from the site and ejected from the project. So yeah,
Mm.
we're this project, it's not like that at all. The client's completely lovely, a real enthusiast. So we're really lucky.
Well, I'm glad that you're able to do that because you guys have talked about this for a long time. This room's been in the works for a long time. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But today's topic is going to be, what is today's topic? How can I even put this? It is common AV and home theater misconceptions. And there are a lot of them. And Peter joined today and went, I have a list.
I have a list.
He does have a list. A man with lists is a man that you should probably listen to. He's got a list of 5, and we'll probably shoot off of those, but 5 main ones.
And you know what? I think AV is a bit like politics and news these days. You can't believe anyone. Just don't believe any one person. Listen to lots and lots and lots of
Mhm.
people, synthesize stuff, figure out who you think's the most authoritative, and then, form a balanced view between lots of people that have told you stuff.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to have the same thing on today's cast because nothing we're going to talk about is revolutionary. Everything is stuff that gets talked about. When you did your podcast last week with Tom,
Mhm.
I think he probably went over quite a few of these because you just do. They're the obvious ones.
Mhm.
But the great thing for me and the way that I've learned over the years is not just to talk to one person and go, yeah, I believe them. That's what I'm going to do. But to talk to 10 different people about the same topic. And you'll get, probably 8 similar explanations. 2 of them will just be complete nut jobs that you can ignore. But the nice thing about listening to 10 is that because 8 people have said the same thing in 8 different ways, and 2 people have said something completely different, I'm not saying that the 2 people are wrong. That's absolutely not the case. But it's really, really dangerous reading one forum post or listening to
Yes.
one person's opinion, and specifically saying, "Oh, this manufacturer told me,"
Mhm.
because manufacturers, I hate to say it, are not there to tell the truth. They're
No.
there to sell stuff,
Yeah.
and their stuff is in the main very, very, very good stuff. But they usually come up with opinions that slant the landscape towards their stuff and against other people's. So yeah, a lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about today, you've heard the same topics from Tom, you've heard the same topics from Ben and Ryan, and a load of other people. And hopefully, I'll just give a slightly different slant on it.
I look at it as when you hear these conversations and you hear people talk about it, it should become, "Hey, I wanna learn more, and I'm gonna go do my own research on this." It should just be a springboard where you're starting from, and then you need to use that as, "Oh, I'm gonna go do my own thing and perform my own validations to see what's actually going on." There's no substitute for you getting in the weeds and checking and validating, as long as you're doing it correctly, because there are a lot of ways to screw things up and come to incorrect or, misleading conclusions. But I think it's important that people not listen to one source, kind of consolidate everything, listen to everybody, But the important thing is to go validate, right? Go check how things are performing, go check if you can learn and then learn it yourself. And there's no substitute for actually gaining that knowledge instead of just listening to other people talk about it. Um, because opinions, those it's not always the case. A lot of this can be opinion. I mean, you talk about acoustics and stuff, you talk to 10 different acousticians, you're going to get 10 different answers. So it's a lot of it in acoustics can be based on opinion. So it's important to figure out where you stand and where you kind of come out with all of this together. So I'm excited to go through all of this, Peter. So you've ranked these. Are these ranked in any way?
Well, arguably 5 down to 2, you could take in any order. I think
Okay.
number 1 really is number 1. And
All right.
number 2 is probably the biggest misconception, but I'd say that number 2 is the single most important thing when thinking about these wonderful rooms that you're building.
All right. And we'll probably deviate. We always fork and go off onto other pathways as we're talking about this, but this is going to be a good foundation. So, Peter, we're just going to dive into this. What is number five? And again, five through two, you say there aren't really a list, but
There's
let's
not
go
there's
with
not
five.
really an order. Yeah, 2 is probably the biggest misconception with the most BS spoken about. But number 1, I'd say is the number 1 thing I see people getting wrong, and the number 1 misconception around what
Okay.
we do, and the number 1 which when you start thinking about it another way, you kind of think, "Yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it?"
Mhm.
So we'll get to number 1. Hope we leave enough time for that.
Let's start on five.
So in number 5, when I'll slightly diverge. The industry is very, very, very good at showing pretty pictures of rooms.
Mm,
And they'll show a pretty picture and go, "Oh, isn't this a wonderful room?" And you'll get loads and loads of replies, virtual signaling. "Oh yeah, it's a wonderful room. Well done. Congratulations." And I look at these rooms and I think, really?
mhm.
There's just some basic stuff you've done wrong here. And you don't even have to see speakers. You don't even have to see a rack. You don't have to see a calibration report. You can just look at a picture of a room and go, I think you could have done better. And in at number 5 in our top 5 rundown, sounds like top of the pops here, is one of the things that I look at rooms and you can't always go, yeah, they couldn't have done better. But I then look at the equipment list and see what the projector was that they used and did a you do a 10-second geometry drawing and a 10-second back of a piece of toilet paper or whatever you want to call it calculation of what the vertical lens shift capability of that projector is, and you realize no, that screen is too high. And in at number 5 is this misconception that screens should be high up. There seems to be this thing, oh, but when I'm sitting in a cinema and I'm in the front row, the top of the screen is,
Mhm.
just so high. And yeah, it is. But you know what? The bottom of the screen's not that high. Just because the top of the screen's really high does not mean the bottom is. And in life, and in cinema and in every cinematographer's mind, a lot of cinematography, you're trying to put people in a kind of sense of unease. So a different perspective is used, a perspective that we as humans are not used to, and it's intentional. But the vast majority of perspectives in cinematography, be it Hollywood or Netflix or even just a news report, are at eye level.
Mhm.
It's as if the camera was at eye level and it's seeing the perspective of the scene as if we'd see it. And when we're seeing a scene naturally, life doesn't happen up there. When we're not looking up at people, we're looking ahead and actually slightly down. Most of life is below the horizon. If you take the horizon as the middle of what we're looking at, kind of almost
Yeah.
there, most of what happens in life is below that. So if you're putting screens up high just because you think, oh well, that's what you do in cinemas, it's just completely wrong. You end up looking up. And everything that we're trying to do in a home theater, home cinema, private cinema, whatever you want to call it, everything we're trying to do is really to be true to the story being told. And the people putting this content together put a huge amount of time and effort and expense into telling the most amazing, captivating stories. And they're making some assumptions. And one of them assumptions is, well, you're watching a TV, and that TV is broadly at eye level. When you just look at whole house stuff, you often see TVs placed above a fireplace.
Mhm.
And look, I get it. I get it. The fireplace is the focal point of the room. You can't have two sets of seating arrangements, one for a TV, one for a fireplace. So the TV ends up being put above the
It's a
fireplace.
known
But
compromise.
it's yeah, it's a ridiculous place to put a display device. And there are some things that cause screens to have to go too high.
Yep.
And, the main one is you've got quite a low ceiling, and you've got multiple tiers of seats. And with multiple tiers of seats, you've got to see above the person in front to the bottom of the screen. So unless you've got really sympathetic geometry, every row you put in, you're probably having to raise the bottom, where the bottom of that screen is, a little up, 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 and up. So where you have multiple rows, in order to see over the person in front, you often have to push that screen up a little bit higher. And also the projector, that has got to be able to see over the heads of people, over the heads of the tallest possible person sitting the most upright they're ever going to be, to the bottom of the screen. And often that's the cause. But sometimes I look at a room and it's one tier of seating sitting on the floor, and it's maybe, I'm going to try and think in feet here, the room's maybe 10, 11 feet tall, so you've got some height, and the screen is just slammed right up against the ceiling. And if we just go beyond what is comfortable cinematic geometry, the fact you've got that screen so close to the ceiling means the reflections from the ceiling in terms of light are going to be stronger. So unless that ceiling is flat matte black, which is generally a good idea, but not always possible because of interior design, you're going to get distracting reflections off the ceiling. And also, in terms of sound to picture coherence, those front three speakers are going to end up being really quite high, and that's just not natural. And if you're using that room for music as well as watching a picture with it, that's it just becomes completely unnatural. And one of the things I work really, really hard to do in cinema design, and just to talk to interior designers and talk to homeowners and figure this out, is number one thing, you talk about use modes. Number two things, you talk about seating. Third thing I always talk about is the screen.
Yeah.
Where's the screen going to be? How big's the screen's going to
Well,
be?
because the screen size and positioning dictates so much other things in the room, frankly. I mean, where that is going to dictate a lot of the other things based on limitations and compromises and live with and live withouts. And even your point about paint, even flat black paint is still going to reflect back on the screen. I mean, unless you're doing something like a
Mm.
high grade velvet, you're creating issues when you do things like that. Um, so just there's always something that you have to consider. You're always giving up something else. There is always a trade. Nothing is ever free. Sometimes that trade is money, but you're always giving up something. So fully agree on that. People do not think about the screen enough. It's always, well, I've got all these other things, and here's where I'm limited to put the screen. Well, you should have thought about that a long time ago, where unfortunately you've ruined a good portion of your viewing and enjoyment of your space based on the screen. And you may not know it, but subconsciously now you're not going to want to use that space nearly as much because it's not as enjoyable, or it's not the enjoyable, it's not as natural for you to be able to utilize. Like, I'm sure this is the case in the room that you guys are just finishing up. I know it's the case in my showroom. People always think, "Oh man, you're 9 feet from 165." Well, the reason that works is because my eye line is almost directly in the middle of the screen,
Mm.
right? It feels very natural. People always say, "Oh, your field of view feels normal because I'm smack dab in the middle of the screen." Doesn't feel unnatural, doesn't feel too big. So if you get placement correct, if you get things to work within the bounds of what you have, and you make them feel as natural as possible, I argue you can get away with a lot more, right? You can get away with more of an extreme if you try and make things, if your starting point is how can I make this feel natural? You can build from there and make things feel more extreme. But when you go extreme and things are already unnatural, you're in for a bad time.
And I think a lot of this stems from bad design or really no design. That you
Mhm.
read the forums and you look at so many podcasts and the conversations are about product. You know,
Always.
is this subwoofer better than that subwoofer? Should I use this French processor or that French processor? And when you're talking about seating arrangement and you're talking about room geometry, I don't care. I haven't got to the stuff yet. The stuff is a conversation I'm gonna have last, not first. And unfortunately, I'd say the majority of professional companies still start with the stuff, and the majority of enthusiasts still starts with the stuff. And the process is discovery first. And if you're an enthusiast, do discovery with yourself. Literally, write down for yourself, what am I trying to get out of this room?
Yes.
What are my priorities? You know, what am I going to watch most? Oh, actually, I watch Netflix more than I watch Hollywood movies. Or, oh, you know, the main thing I want this for is sports. And write down, do yourself a little picture, draw that bell curve. I think Ben showed you my favorite
Mhm.
bell curve picture a few weeks ago of these are the important amount of people in the room. It's between 3 and 5 people that are gonna be in that room 95% of the time. So
I'd
what
argue that even that's too high. I mean, the majority of theaters that are used, it's maybe 1 or 2 people.
it probably is. The point being, write this down. Be your own client and write down your priorities and your
Mhm.
needs. Then go into design, and design is not engineering. The output of design is a definition of the user experience, and that will start with a spatial layout of the room. And you know, you might think, oh, Peter, he's doing all these ridiculous projects for billionaires. Sure, but I'm not talking money here. If you've got a low budget and this is a family room, it's still exactly,
Right.
and it's a 65-inch OLED on the wall, it's still exactly the same process. And
Doesn't change.
great design enables you to take informed engineering decisions. If you haven't done a design, you can't do engineering. So a design is a floor plan, a design is a section, a design is a seating plan, a design is a list of what objective performance requirements you would like from the outcome. Engineering is, well, how are we going to get there? How are we going
Yep.
to achieve that? And the output of engineering is a list of specifications that you need from your product. And then you go out and find the
I
right.
think the biggest thing that people need to take away, at least in my opinion on this one, is take the thoughts about products that the sexy things that you wanna buy that we they're easy, right? They're a piece of kit that you can buy and I can place in a room and doesn't have to have much thought about it. Take that and put it aside for the majority of this process and focus on exactly what Peter's telling you. Focus on the design and the use case for the space, and then use those products as tools to meet that end instead of the other way around. Don't compromise the space to make the products work. Compromise the products to make the space work. In my not necessarily compromise, but pick the products to make the space work
Exactly
is
that.
the best way to approach this. All
Exactly.
too often on AVS and Facebook, you'll see people, "Hey, I want a sub upgrade." And they say, "What about these 2 subwoofers?" There's no context on the room, there's no context on their use case, there's no context on how far away they're sitting or how much they care, what their limitations are, anything. It's just, "I wanna buy something new." And I think in a lot of cases, if you guys take away nothing else from this stream, I think this is going to be a repeated theme for every one of these. In a lot of those cases, it is a huge waste of money because you're not fixing the issue. You're just throwing more money at a problem and hoping it's going to fix it. And it's like, oh, I've got a problem. This doesn't necessarily make sense, but I've got a problem going off road, and you're just throwing money at tires when the real issue is your suspension and transmission, right? It's not sexy and it's not as easy to fix as the tires because it doesn't change the look of your car necessarily, but it's right in front of your face. So I'm going to make that choice and I'm going to make that, but it's not fixing my problem. And I'm just throwing money at it because it's there and I'm still going to have the same issue. When at the end, I could have spent less, if anything at all, and had a much better experience. So,
A lot of people are collectors. I'm later this week. I'm off to Vienna for the Vienna High End Audio Show.
mhm,
That's the show that used to be in Munich. It's the world's biggest hi-fi and audio show, and it's crazy. It's mad. It's got loads and loads and loads of stupid stuff, and the majority of people that buy this stupid stuff, the excuse they'll make to buy it is, "Oh well, it'll sound better," but really, they're audiophiles are collectors.
yeah,
They like collecting nice stuff. Now, I'm completely guilty. I'm a very, very mediocre photographer, and I spend way, way, way too much on Leica cameras. And, I'm a collector. I like using and touching and feeling nice stuff. It's something that gives me a kick. So it's not a criticism. If you want to collect stuff and have the pride of ownership, absolutely do it. But don't do it on the altar of making something better.
mhm,
This project that we've recently finished, if the client came to us and said, "Here's another $1 million, make it better," we would hand on heart go, "We don't know how. We literally don't know how to make it better than it currently is. We could make it different. It would sound, in terms of the way the picture looks, it's as good as it gets already. In terms of the way it sounds, or we could make it sound different with a different character by using a different speaker brand, it certainly wouldn't be better. And the only way you can really look at better and spend your money in a really, really great value way, forget about cost for now, let's look at value, is to go through this design engineering specification sequence. And if you want to improve something, look at, okay, what is it about what I currently have I don't like? Well, the base is a bit, I'm going to use some horrible phrases here. The base is a bit soggy, the base is a bit wet, it doesn't have much impact. Well, quite honestly, the best possible purchase you could make, the best upgrade you could make, is spend $80 on a mini DSP UMic 1,
yep,
download Room EQ Wizard, and learn how to use it, because your bass is probably sludge. Nothing to do with the equipment, everything to do with where the speakers are located, where you're located, how the crossover happens, how the processor is set up. And that's free. So get the engineering right before you start thinking about new equipment. And when you start thinking about new equipment, be objective. Well, I'd like the bass to go down lower. Okay, physics. It's just physics. If you halve the frequency, you need to move 4 times the amount of air to maintain the same sound pressure level. So then you get into the realms of, well, leave brands out of it for now. Look at the specifications. Look
yeah.
at look at the volume displacement capability of that subwoofer, because at low frequencies, that's really all that matters. But these are things for a different cast. But the fundamental here is that you've got to start with, what are you going to use the room for? Be your own client.
Yep.
Go through discovery, go through design, go through engineering. And I think if you did that, we'd probably end up with fewer screens up in the sky.
It's
Which
amazing.
brings,
Go ahead.
I was going to move on to number four.
Oh, I'm gonna say something real quick. It's amazing that you have been in some of the biggest and best, most well-engineered rooms in the world by you and by other people, and yet you are one of the largest proponents for people not spending money
Yeah.
and spending less and fixing the underlying issues. Now to rehash and to summarize this particular number 5, it's screens too high, and we kind of went off on a tangent there. And I'm gonna throw a wrench into this in that, and this goes back to Peter making you all think about how is this space going to be used. If you have an absolute use case where the second row is as important as the front row, you may find that you need a higher screen for your use case for that theater in order to make it work. If you have, say, low ceilings and you can't create a higher riser, or you've gone through all of that thought process through design, that is a compromise you have to make, right? You've reached that, you've gone through it, but at least if you have to do that, go through the process to determine that that is the compromise that must be made in order for you to meet the goal that you have set out for this particular space. If you don't go through that design process, that engineering process, you're leaving a lot on the table and you may go a different direction or a wrong direction and making other compromises as opposed to making a much simpler or more defined one. Um, so anyway, number two or number four, I guess, since we're going backwards.
Number 4, and we've already touched on this, and we've almost already covered it, but number 2 is the distraction thing. I'm a cinema designer, private cinema designer. That's what I would say my job is. I'm not an
Yeah.
acoustician. I'm not a whole house integrator. I am a cinema designer. That's what my skill set is. And I can sum up my jobs that for every single project, I need to do 4 things. I need to minimize distortion.
Yep.
I need to minimize distractions. I need to maximize comfort, and I need to ensure compliance. That's kind of summing up my job. The minimize distortion, that's with audio, that's with video, that's rattles, that's loudspeaker distortion, that's room modes, that's group delay. All of those are forms of distortion. Minimize distractions, which is what number 4 is about. Come back to that. Maximize comfort. Well, that's not just about what you're sitting on. That's managing the temperature in the room, managing the humidity in the room, managing the carbon dioxide in the room. And number 4, compliance, just making sure that everything is legal and compliant with what needs to be done.
Mhm.
But going back to number 2, minimizing distractions. People, when they're designing these rooms, often just focus on the screen.
Yep.
It's this white or gray or LED or LCD display on the wall, and the
It's
whole
box
focus
on the
is
wall.
whole
Yep.
focus is this. They don't think about what's around it, what's in your eye line. And one of the things I see a lot of is this kind of ruched carpet, relatively thick pile carpet,
Oh,
which when you look down on it, depending how people have been walking on it or how it's been hoovered, has sort of lots of swirly patterns in different direction. I see cinemas with brightly colored, really busy pattern carpets right up to the screen wall. You see wall-to-wall screens, and right adjacent to the edge of the screen, there's some wall lights, or there's maybe some movie posters. You see screens hard up against the ceiling, and that ceiling is paint basically gloss white.
mhm.
These are all taking away from your sense of immersion. They are all distractions, because our, humans' vision, and this is whatever you choose to believe, this is evolution, that we have this really wide field of vision. And if I put my hand up over here, I'm aware of my hand. I can't really see it in any definition. And if I shake it around, I'm aware of my hand shaking around. This is so when we were hunting in the savannah tens of thousands of years ago, if there was a predator hiding in the
Yep.
bushes, it would take our attention off. We're constantly using our visual brain power to scan our periphery. Now, if you've got elements on the wall, you've got this pattern carpet, you've got this white painted ceiling. As there's content on the screen and that content is bright content, it lights up the walls, it lights up the
Yep.
ceiling, it lights up the floor, and things are going on in your peripheral vision. And that's really, really, really distracting. And it takes away from your immersiveness. It uses up brain power. Your brain is processing that stuff going on.
Mhm.
And often when people sit in a room and just relax and listen to music, I know a lot of people that when they listen to music, they'll turn the lights off, or they'll just light some
It's
candles.
transformative.
And yeah, and one of the things you're doing, you're just stopping your brain from
You know,
processing
before we
stuff.
go on any further, I have a very unique lens into this because Peter, you and I may have mentioned, I have talked about this in the past. I may have mentioned this on stream, but I got in a bad motorcycle accident almost 10 years ago. And that motorcycle accident caused some brain damage. It caused some issues, and I lost my brain's ability to filter through its vestibular system. So everything you're talking about, everything your subconscious is doing, my brain that you're not actively paying attention to, my brain went, "You know what? We're not gonna ignore that anymore. We're gonna take it from over here, and we're gonna shove it right in the middle of your active cognitive thinking." It is amazing how much stuff your brain is thinking about, processing, dealing with that you are not paying attention to. But what Peter's getting at is that subconscious processing that is occurring, even though it is not in the forefront of your mind, it is actively impacting what you're doing, your enjoyment, how you're getting into it, because you may not even be able to settle into a movie and get to that AV nirvana because your brain is distracted by all this other stuff going on around you. You may not realize that it is, but it is because it's processing and it sees all of this other stuff. So if you can remove all of that, objectivity in the front, party in the back, where you can't see anything, but you still maybe want some of the knickknacks and all of that. Just put them behind your peripheral vision where you can't pay attention to them because your brain is doing an inordinate amount of processing without you being aware. When it was really bad, I could walk into a room, say somebody was having a surprise birthday party, and there was stuff on the walls that didn't make sense, and my brain felt like it effectively threw up on itself because it is processing all of this stuff. You're not paying attention to it, but it's processing it, and it gets overloaded, and it can't deal with all of that. So you do this in a theatrical environment where you're thinking about all of this stuff subconsciously instead of allowing your subconscious mind to immerse itself in what your conscious mind is doing. You're not getting to that AV nirvana again that the cinematographer to the director, the audio engineer, whomever wants you to get to fully immerse yourself in that content. You are leaving that on the table simply by distracting your subconscious mind. And if you can remove that, I see somebody in chat saying velvet all the things. I don't know that I would go that far because there is a piece of this. Some people it's great, but there is a piece of this in my opinion where the room has to be inviting. It has to be pleasant to be in. And if it is not, it's not inviting, it's not a place you want to necessarily be, Tim, that may be some place for you with Velvet, you're probably going to subjectively use it less. So it's important to find the level of distraction limiting that works for you and then apply that into your space.
And if you velvet everything, you've almost certainly completely ruined your acoustics. Velvet is quite an evil substance in a room when it comes to acoustics, and we can hint talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, distraction is one of the key things. Many years ago, I did a very, very high-end 2-channel listening room for a customer, and one of the things I suggested was a big roll-down black scrim that basically rolled down in front of the equipment that was in between the two speakers and the two speakers that were about a meter and a half away from the back wall, meter and a half in from the side walls, to completely just so it was just black. And the client was, "Oh, really? Do you think it's worth it?" I said, "Believe me, let's do it. If you don't like it, you never have to drop it, but I promise it'll be transformative." And it was transformative. It was incredibly acoustically transparent. There was less than half a dB loss at 16K. It was basically the same kind of material as you use for scrims on the back of acoustically transparent screens to improve contrast. And it just meant that when the customer was listening to music, it was, yeah, I'm listening to music. Our hearing system is massively influenced by our sight. And if we see the source of sound, that's where we're going to place the sound. If we don't see the source of sound, then we just perceive a sound field. So if you remove all sound sources from your field of vision, you are going to get a much, much, much more seamless experience.
It's more enveloping.
Yeah. And, you know, I know some collectors, they go, oh, but I like to see my speakers. Really? Do you really like to see your speakers? I get it. In a living room, in a family area where your floor standing loudspeakers are a statement, you know, these are a beautiful sculptural piece of amazing engineering. I get that. But in a cinema, get rid of them, hide them, hide them.
Yep.
Make that whole field of view as less distracting as you possibly can. We have a couple of standing things we do with all our rooms. I'd almost say it's non-negotiable. I've never had a room yet, well, recently, where I've had to compromise, so that's good. But 1.5 meters in from the screen, which is what, about 4.5, 5 feet in from the screen, flat black all the way around.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a strip of black carpet, natural fibers, preferably, because anything synthetic has got little shiny bits. Very, very thin pile. It's not there for acoustic absorption. It's just there to absorb light. Very flat back, non-reflective, acoustically transparent fabric on the side. And we even generally put fabric panels with a little bit of diffusion above them on the ceiling.
Yep.
So it feels like it's just a window into another world. You're not distracted by things going on and things flashing. And yeah, of course, in some multi-purpose rooms, it's just not going to be possible. I get it. But if you have the opportunity to do this, it will hugely decrease your cognitive load when you're watching content by just removing all of that distraction.
Yep. It's amazing what velvet can do in that space visually. I know it has some issues with acoustics, but visually creating that floating screen, it is transformative. And I would encourage everybody to experience that at least once, even if it's not in your own space, just to see what it's like to be, even if it's just visually immersed, not fully immersed. Um, because there are other things that have to go with that, but visually immersed to lose that distraction, it's an amazing experience, and it doesn't seem like a lot, and it's one of those things that doesn't have to be expensive. It Getting velvet or doing those things doesn't have to be expensive, it can be very
Careful
cheap.
with velvet. Please be
Be
careful with
careful with
velvet.
velvet, I'm just using it as an example.
Yeah.
Uh, it can be transformative. Number
Should
3?
we go to number 3?
I think so.
And this is, I know it's something that Ben's talked about quite a lot. Why are we as an industry and why are we as a community so obsessed with how loud things go? It's
Mm,
how many subwoofers have you got? How much bass have you got? How loud can you play it? And the ability to go loud is important. In my list of 4 things I do as a cinema designer, you know, one of the first is probably eliminate distortion, or as much as I can. You can never completely eliminate distortion, but every single technical decision you take in the audio system, number one in your checklist should be, how am I minimizing distortion? And don't just think of distortion as being the total harmonic distortion of the speaker. It's, you know, the combination of everything that happens from reproduced signal to a pressure change at your eardrum that your brain then converts into sound. Every single step is introducing distortions.
mhm.
And so SPL capability, sound pressure level capability, how loud can your system go, but not change in character, have minimal distortion? That's important, sure. But in my cinemas, I obsess way more with making that room quiet. It is, you know, quiet is an obsession. And if you have a sort of a one-piece cassette air conditioning unit in the room, it's never going to be quiet. If you have a projector hanging from a pole in the ceiling, it's never going to be quiet. And again, yes, there's going to be a lot of scenarios, especially when you have very little space and very little budget, that you're going to have to suspend a projector from the ceiling. you're gonna have to have just an air conditioning unit on the wall with the fan blazing. You have no choice. But the two biggest sources of noise in these rooms are, number one, the projector.
Mhm.
Do everything you possibly can to get the projector out of the room. And even if you can't get it out of the room, which again, in I'd probably say the majority of rooms, it's going to be a struggle. At least try and box it in. Try
Try
and
and
push it
minimize it.
try and push it, put it in a hush box, or maybe if you can and you have the opportunity, mount it vertically on the back wall, shine it off a mirror. The light and the quality loss are going to be minimal compared to what you can then do to make that thing look quiet, make that thing be quiet and not such a visual impact of a projector hanging right above your head in a room. And with when it comes to cooling, again, do if you have the opportunity, do everything you possibly can to make that cooling as quiet as possible. Once you've probably the most transformative demo I can do for anybody. Forget about loud, forget about bass, forget about infrasonic, forget about, we have the ability in our demo facility to do, which you probably have as well, Ryan, 500 nits, um,
Mhm.
perfectly tone mapped. For a lot of content, it looks magnificent. All of these things are magnificent. But by far, one of my favorite demo pieces, which was probably my film of last year, is Civil War. And towards the beginning, there's an explosion. And then rather than that hideous fake tinnitus that you sometimes get in movies, it's complete silence,
Yeah.
complete silence. And the tension is palpable. It's very, very intentional. That director is intending complete silence. And if you have an air conditioner wearing away or you have a projector wearing away, you just don't get anywhere near that same sense of tension. And another reason that quiet is so incredibly useful, it isn't just for the quiet passages in a movie. There's an effect called masking, and masking is what makes audio compression possible. Audio compression is all based around masking. And masking says if you have a loud sound at a certain frequency or at a set of certain frequencies, that will mask quiet sounds below it. So in compression, that's used because, during the loud passages, all of that data of the low level signals, just get rid of it because you're not going to hear it. It's
Yeah.
really as simple as that. Because the loud stuff's going on, you're not going to hear the quiet stuff. And it's exactly the same in a room. And the really, really quiet things in a movie soundtrack are the things that give you a sense of space. It's incredible. If you have a room with the ability to be really quiet, introduce some noise into it. Just introduce some noise. Just, play low level pink noise from a Bluetooth speaker or something. And what you'll find is that the room instantly feels smaller.
Yeah.
And it feels smaller because you're not getting all those tiny low level oral cues to give you a sense of space in a room. So quiet, I would argue if I have the opportunity of making a room really, really quiet, which costs a lot of money often,
Mhm.
or I have the opportunity to extract that last bit of infrasonic or that last sort of 4 dBs worth of headroom at the top end, I would choose quiet 100% of the time. 100%. The infrasonic stuff is incredible. The headroom is incredible, but that's only useful in a very, very, very small percentage of content, a small amount of the time. Quiet is useful 100% of the time. If you have a quiet room, you're going to have a far, far, far better experience.
I
And
would
again, a lot of quiet isn't necessarily about throwing money at it. It's just throwing a bit of thought at it during the
Mhm.
design stage. Is there any way I can get that projector out of the room? Is there any way I can orientate the room in a way that in an adjacent space at the back of the room, I can build a box. Maybe it's a garage, maybe it's a kitchen, maybe you can hide it in the top of a kitchen cabinet, or it's a hallway where you've got some ceiling height that just a boxed in projector no one's ever going to notice.
Yeah.
Thinking about those don't have to cost a lot of money, but it profoundly makes the room better.
I would argue that a really quiet room reduces the need for the room to be as loud. You're increasing your dynamics in ways. I mean, there's no substitute in some cases for SPL, but I think if you're in a really quiet space, you get to a point where you find that you don't need it as loud and you're able to perform more. There's less distraction. Your brain is not going, "Hey, I have to mask that," subconsciously, so you have to turn it up. You're in a lot of cases able to listen and be immersed at a lower listening volume because you're not having to cover up certain things that are distracting. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of these things we're trying to get rid of distractions in the theater. And if you can make the theater or the space quieter, you're simply removing distraction. I fully agree. Some of the most immersive experiences that I have had are in theater, and I've been in a lot of theaters, been in a lot of really nice theaters, are the quiet parts. Because a lot of theaters can do loud, far less theaters can do quiet. And unfortunately, in my situation, I can't get the projector out of the room, so I'm kind of stuck. But if you are stuck, as Peter said, in those situations, at least try and do things to mitigate or lessen the impact that those things have on the listening experience. In my case, we built a hush box around the projector. It's loud enough that you can still hear it to some extent, but it cut the volume significantly. So if you can't get something out of the room, at least try and find avenues and directions that you can minimize its impact on your experience. Because any distraction is going to lessen the experience of reaching that AV nirvana that you're trying to get to in these spaces, which is why we build them in the first place. Number was that
That
4
was
or
number
3?
3.
All
When
right,
we're
so
now
number
we're now
2.
on to the top 2. And the top 2 is a classic. It's the misconception. It is by far the most common one. It gets talked about all of the time, but still professionals and enthusiasts and consumers, many, 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 too many still believe it. And that is EQ, and specifically auto magic button EQ
Mhm.
just fixes all of your acoustic problems.
Mhm.
Don't worry about the acoustics of the room. Don't worry about speaker placement. Don't worry about angling speakers. Don't worry about, mixing models and mixing brands, because that auto EQ will just magically fix it all. And nothing, nothing, nothing could be further from the truth. If you look at this discovery, design, engineering, specification process, there's a lot of iteration between them, and between engineering and specification, you kind of have to go backwards and forwards. Once you have an engineering outcome, a specification, and you then choose a product,
Yep.
you could look at that product and go, okay, this is a really great compromise, but I'm still going to have to go back to engineering to optimize how I use this specific product. And you sort of have to go through that circle of decision making until you've balanced all of those compromises. And the other thing with AutoCal, and I know this is something that Ben has talked about a lot, is the obsession with frequency response
Mhm.
when everyone forgets about time domain response. And I would argue, and I've said this before on this cast, time domain is something we can't hear through. There in nature, there are no time domain errors. If you remove electronic signal paths, recording and reproduction, if you just go into nature, it doesn't matter where you are. It could be an elephant in a cave. It could be a bird in a living room. Doesn't matter where you are, there are no time domain errors, because the sources of sound are perfect sources of sound. They haven't been mucked around with. There's no jitter, there's no crossovers, there's no filters, there's no multiple drive unit, there's no group delay, There's no, there's none of these things that in themselves are not necessarily evil, but the second those things interact with a small room, then they become inherently evil. There's
Mhm.
none of that. And we can hear through, some pretty gross frequency domain issues. And a big issue, a big example of that is as we get older, doesn't matter how old you are, when you get to my age, and I think I'm probably older than I look, you end up with a little bit of hearing loss. It's
Yeah.
not significant, it's nowhere near deafness or anything that needs correcting, but there is a bit of hearing loss. Frequency responses change. Every couple of years, I go to an audiologist and I have my hearing tested. I get a full report because I want to make sure that when I'm calibrating a room, what I'm hearing, I'm not hearing things in my way that to someone else would, be a disastrous decision.
Mhm.
But we hear through that. We compensate. One of my best friends, he's a classically trained musician, and within a couple of bars, he can tell me whether it's a Steinway, a Bechstein, a Yamaha, or a Bosendorfer, because he's just so attuned to that. I haven't got a clue. Most people haven't got a clue, and we don't need those little fine frequency response things to be perfect. What we do need, as much as possible, is for time domain to be perfect.
Yep.
And I will sacrifice, and I admit it, I sacrifice, how nice and flat my frequency response curve is on the altar of as good time domain response I can get out of the system as possible. And when you do auto EQ, I guarantee you, it doesn't matter what the auto EQ is. We all have our favorites, and my favorite isn't because I probably think it is the best, but I never publicly say it's the best because the best is almost like that Mac versus PC debate.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, a Mac is better, but that's beside the point. But the answer is the better one is the one that you're used to. The better
Yeah.
one is the one that you understand. The better one is the one that you intimately know how to get the best out of. So you've put all of your money into this incredible audio system. You've pressed a button, you've moved the mic around a few times, and the system's made all these weird and wonderful noises. It then gives you a prediction that shows, oh, what a beautiful flat frequency response I've got. It doesn't show you anything else, just shows you a frequency response, and you think, I've calibrated my system. No, you haven't. You've no idea what you've done. Most processors don't really tell you what they've done, and none of them do an after verification. So those graphs you get, they're all predictions.
Predictions.
They're
Yep.
not they're not this is what actually happens. So my first bit of advice is, again, and I see a question has come up, you Mike One, Roomy Q Wizard, get yourself a microphone, learn how to use Room EQ Wizard. You won't learn in an hour or 2 hours or 2 days and 2 weeks. It is a lifetime of study, and there's only one person on the planet that understands 100% of Room EQ Wizard, and that's John Mulcahy, who wrote the thing. It is the most ridiculously deep piece of software, and there's loads of other amazing measurement software. There's audio tools by Studio 6 Digital, there's Smart, there's a load of others. Pick one, learn how to use it really, really well, and you will have that, oh, holy crap moment when you realize that your auto EQ is not as good as it thinks it is.
Yeah.
And then the things that separate consumer products from professional products, it's often, not how good it sounds. It's what are the tools it gives you to then go further. Okay, it's done an auto calibration. What more can you then do to tweak that? You take measurements and go, actually, I would like to go further than the auto magic button based on the actual real in-room measurements I've taken after it's done its auto calibration, so I know what I can then do. And again, I can't teach you how to do that in an hour or a day or a week or even a month. It's a lifetime of learning,
Mhm.
but it's worth it, and a little bit goes a really, really long way. And in that iterative engineering specification, Your job as an engineer is to do as much as you can in the physical domain. And when I say in the physical domain, I'm talking about how are you orientating
In
speakers
the
so they
analog.
don't
Yeah.
in the analog. You know, I hate to call it analog domain because some of it is actually digital,
Sure.
optimizing a digital signal path. But yeah, in the analog, in the physical domain rather than electronic. Um, your job is to maximize the system as much as possible, maximize what's going on with the acoustics of the room, maximize what's going on with the orientation of the speakers, maximize what's going on with seating positions, maximize, where are your subwoofers. One of the very early decisions you need to take during design is, what is your bass philosophy? How are you going to do bass? And there's no this is always the right answer, but you have to have some kind of strategy. And then if you say, well, part of my base strategy is going to be a near field sub, fine. I've got nothing against near field subs, but only for one seat. Near
Mhm.
field subs can deliver incredible results to one seat or two quite tightly clustered seats. Everyone else is screwed in the room. You've no idea what the modal response of the room's going to be. And that's a decision. And if that's your decision, well, that is part of your base strategy. And that's okay. That's fine. But there has to be a base strategy, because that base strategy is also linked in with what's the processor capable of. Because if I'm using Trinov with waveforming, I'm going to have a very specific subwoofer layout. If I'm using ART with a Dirac processor, I'm going to use a very, very different, but also quite a deliberate subwoofer layout. If I'm using standard Dirac, I'm going to use a different subwoofer layout again. If I'm just using manual EQ with four subs, I'm going to use a different subwoofer location again. And before anyone sort of says, "Oh, I've got this room, and where should I put my subwoofers?" I don't know. There's a lot of engineering and a lot of questions and a whole discovery, design, engineering, and understanding your equipment process that needs to happen before you can come up with that answer. And it's not about this is what you should always do. And this is one of the problems with the industry. I'm very, very privileged. I got involved with CEDIA 30 years ago in my career, and I've been teaching for CEDIA for 25 years. And one of the things that teaching does, it helps me learn,
Mhm.
because firstly, to teach, you have to learn things from first principles. And then when you teach, students go, yes, but what if? And I sometimes think to myself in a class, oh yeah, never considered that before. Brilliant. Let's figure it out together. And you figure it out, and you learn something in the class. But there are no if then statements. If this distance from this, then what should I do? It's this huge big circle of decision making that at the end, you also have to include what equipment you're using. And the process is a key part. And it's the ability you have to EQ it is a key part. The more expensive processors you buy, they just have more processing horsepower. That costs money. And to do it quietly costs even more money. And that horsepower gives you the ability to have much, much finer adjustments, not speaker distance in feet. One foot is around 1 millisecond in terms of sound propagation. Now, that might not sound a lot, but in time domain, that's huge. The more upmarket for sophisticated processors will give you 0.01 of a
And you can
millisecond.
hear it. I've played
That's
with this.
it's about that. That's 0.01 of a millisecond. That's, well, I've got to step back.
Yeah.
That's around
If you're
a
doing this in
millisecond.
your left and right speaker and you make that hundredth of a second adjustment, it is amazing how attuned your ears are. You can hear the sound shift. And it's that hundredth of a second matters. And if anybody that says it doesn't, if you're chasing perfection, you need it as granular as possible, in my opinion. So
It's audible at the sub to speaker crossover frequency.
For
It's
sure.
arguably not audible at lower frequencies because the wavelengths
Yes,
are so
I would
long.
agree with that.
And spatially, it's arguably not audible because we're constantly moving around like that. But in certain parts of the calibration spectrum, if you like, it it matters, and
Mhm.
that's what you're paying for. So the people that go, "Oh, $20,000, $30,000 on a processor, what a waste of money." Well, if your whole system is 45,000, don't spend 30,000 on a processor. But if your system is 600,000, 30,000 on your processor will give you access to a load of tools, and tools are like any tools. I'm a mediocre photographer. I've got way too many cameras and lenses. It's fun, but ultimately they're tools. Do they make me a better photographer? No. I'm an okay DIYer, but I wouldn't call myself a joiner or a carpenter. I'll leave that to my fabulous business partner Maurizio. So you give me the most expensive tools available to humanity. I don't know what to do with them. So don't bother with the expensive tools unless you learn how to use them properly.
Just don't file down this pathway. I know you said that you can't hear them in some of those spaces, but when you start making compromises of, well, this doesn't matter because I can't hear it, or this doesn't matter and you can't hear it, and you're starting to allow more and more and more to creep in instead of focusing on eliminating any variables as possible, those little percentage points or a quarter of a percentage point or eighth of they start adding up.
Yeah.
And once you put enough of them together, it can very easily become audible and a distraction. So while any of these things on their own may seem like, oh, that doesn't matter because it's imperceivable, it's imperceptual, it's so small, it doesn't matter. You start stacking those things on top of each other and they compound and they can get out of control very, very quickly. So my argument for that is try and eliminate as many of these variables as possible so you don't have to worry about them again. They're no longer a factor. Take them out of contention and focus on things as they get put in front of you instead of allowing those things to creep in. Back, and then we can move on to number one. One of my biggest things that I tell my customers with the frequency domain in comparison to time domain is what you don't know, you don't know. Realistically, you don't know what that should sound like. So why are we hyper focusing on frequency when we have no idea unless you were in the mastering studio, unless the bird or the trumpet, whoever was sitting there in front of you was there? We don't know. So a small amount of deviation in the frequency domain, you will never perceivably be able to tell unless there is a side by side comparison. However, time domain things are in your face and they are very easy to determine and find. What I think people misconstrue is a lot of times when they think there's an issue, I see this all too common on the forums and Facebook and other social media platforms. They misconstrue what is actually a time domain issue for a frequency domain issue and they
Yeah.
try and fix it in the frequency domain because that's where we live. It's in front of us. It's a graph. It's a pretty there are graphs and wavelets and things for time, but it's easy for us to understand, right? So that's where we want to fix it because we think we understand it and so we want to fix it in that domain. I say as Peter said earlier, you can get away with quite a bit in the frequency domain that is not perfect. Fix it in the time domain. Those little bits, even if it's a little bit off, is easier to notice than you think. Anyway, before
And
we move on,
just
oh,
just just to clear it up, frequency domain is what you get, time domain is when you get it.
mm,
And,
I like
um,
that.
and when you're talking about time domain, you also can't talk about all frequencies arriving at the same time. And this is the essence of time domain. It's almost like, I'm gonna go slightly into the geekosphere here. When people talk about phase, sometimes people mistake phase for polarity.
Yeah.
Now, polarity is the plus and the minus the wrong way around. So, one is 180 degrees out of phase from the other. Phase is what happens between the two extremes. And with time domain issues, the single thing that screws it up is when you have different parts of the frequency spectrum. So, from high frequencies down to really low bass,
Mhm.
arriving at your ear at different times. That's what we mean by time domain error. You measure it with a steady state pink noise. It could give you a flat line. And phase and frequency response are inherently interrelated. If you change frequency response, you're going to alter the phase response. If you change phase response, you are going to alter the frequency response. So there's a decision, as with everything in what we do in this incredible world we live in. It's a compromise. If you make
Yep.
one thing better, you're probably making something else a little bit worse.
Yep.
But the key is to understand these interactions and these interrelations, and then come up with a compromise that is the best balance of compromise. It's not difficult to give a really, really flat frequency response in the subwoofers in the bass area across a moderate seating area. That's not terribly difficult. But in doing that, you could have screwed up the phase response and the time alignment of the system to make it just sound hideous. So don't think that a nice flat line in terms of frequency response means you've done your job right. You've then also got to look at the phase response. You've got to look at the group delays. So you've got to look at time domain as well as frequency.
Mhm.
So let's move on to number one.
Well, before we do that, there was a question that I think we can address here really quickly. So this guy's got a small theater. It's 13 feet by 10 feet, 9-foot high ceilings. He's got a bunch of speakers packed into it. His listening position is 3 feet off the rear wall, so roughly 1 meter. Would you do 2 or 4 overheads?
4.
Do you think those are far enough away from the rear wall? As long as you're able to direct them.
Do the maths. Read RP22 and do the maths. When you talk RP22 land, we don't use angles for where speakers should be positioned. We use zones. And if you look at the different levels, one of the things that separates the different levels is the angular separation between speakers. So there's a horizontal separation. So if you look at the angle between your furthest outward screen channel speaker and your furthest forward surround speaker, there is a set of angular separations to say that you can't have speakers space separated by too much of an angle. The same applies to your overheads as a vertical angle. So just do the maths. And it's one of these realities that small rooms are a real challenge, because when you do the pink noise levels test, the one that goes for one single position, you can get it perfect. So for 3 seats across that room, I think that's really sensible, because the person sitting in the middle, you can still do that pink noise test, and you will shut your eyes and you'll feel like you're in a bubble.
Yep.
The problem with small rooms is you get slightly outside of that reference seating position. And because you're so much closer to some speakers and further away from others, that bubble collapses. That's the size of the room. There's nothing you can do. But I would say, yeah, even with that, you can still get 4 overheads in. And I'd say that would be beneficial over and above just having 1 pair above you.
Okay. On to number 1.
Number 1, top of the pops. And people are going, why haven't you talked about acoustics yet, Peter? And we're about to talk about acoustics. And I kind of think the way the majority of people do acoustics is just completely, utterly, totally ridiculous. That most people, and I'm willing to have this discussion, this debate, most people would argue that the first thing you get right in a room when you're thinking about audio is get the acoustics of the space correct. You can use some really modest equipment in a great acoustic space and it's going to sound fantastic. You can use the finest equipment known to humanity in a terrible acoustic space and it will always sound just a bit terrible. So get the acoustics right. Now, when we look at getting things right in rooms, we don't design our own projectors. We don't generally design our own speakers or our own amps or our own processors or our own control systems. But yet most people design their own acoustics, which I kind of find a little bit bizarre. Now, the components you'd make an amplifier out of would be, some transformers, some integrated circuits, some op amps, some transistors, some resistors, some inductors, a bunch of big capacitors. These are the components that the amplifier designers have available to them to design and make the totality of the thing that you then buy, with the expectation that this is properly engineered. In the acoustic world, we have this ridiculous phrase called acoustic treatment. Think about that word, treatment, acoustic treatment. You treat something when it's sick. We are taking something that's sick, and we are treating it. And the whole idea of an acoustic treatment is kind of ridiculous, because every single thing in a room is doing something to that room acoustically.
Yeah.
Everything is having an acoustic effect on that room. And the reason that acoustic treatments exist, well, that's a very, very good thing, because you're buying something with a certain set of characteristics. And if you know what those characteristics are, then you can use that sympathetically in a circuit. And I say a circuit because if I buy the finest capacitors and the finest resistors and the finest inductors available, I don't have the skill to create the finest amplifier. But yet people seem to think, oh, I'm going to go to this company for my acoustic treatment, and I'm going to throw a bunch in a room, and I've acoustically treated my room. Well, yeah. If you bring a beanbag into the room, you've made a change. If you bring a fat friend, me, Big Benny, into a room, you're gonna you're
It is
gonna
very true.
you're gonna make everything makes a difference. But the number one misconception I see in the industry is you have a room, and you see these rooms. You either see the acoustic treatment products on walls, you see them on walls with some wooden framing that you're about to put acoustically transparent fabric. Oh, I got into a big LinkedIn debate discussion fest years ago, when I had a rant that I basically said, will people that use stretched fabric stop talking about stretched fabric is what they're doing for acoustics? It's the antithesis of what you're doing for acoustics. Stretched fabric should have zero acoustic effect. The
Yeah.
whole point of stretched fabric is it's invisible to acoustics. It's what you put behind it that matters. So acoustic fabric is not an acoustic strategy. It is something to allow your acoustic strategy to work unimpeded. The whole point of acoustically transparent, or as some people say, which I agree with, acoustically translucent, because nothing is perfectly acoustically
Yes.
transparent. Even air is not acoustically transparent. Air is acoustically translucent, but that's semantics. So in every other area of the room, we buy highly engineered products designed and built by uniquely talented individuals that have dedicated their life to putting these raw materials together to produce something magnificent. And then we come along, throw a bunch of random acoustic treatments on the wall and say, hey, I've acoustically treated my space. Well, yeah, you have. You've changed it. Have you changed it for the better? Perhaps. And there's a single important target when it comes to acoustics. It trumps everything else. It's really the only thing that matters big time. Once you've got that right, then you can start talking nuance, and the nuance does matter. But if you've got this wrong, it doesn't matter what else you do, you're screwed. And that is reflection decay time.
Yeah.
And we call it reflection decay time rather than reverberation, because small rooms are not large enough to be statistically reverberant within the sort of time scales that we look at those rooms in. The idea of reverberation is a concert hall, is a church. Those are truly statistically reverberant spaces. in the rooms that we have, which are all, even the beautiful room that we've just finished, which is what, 10 by 7.5 by 5.5 meters, that will be considered a big private cinema. It's still acoustically a small room,
Small room.
where which is not, it's not, we don't consider it reverberant. We have reflection decay time. And that reflection decay time varies per frequency. Now you can look at, if you give a single number, that should be the average between 125 hertz and 4K, not just, well, this is what it is at 1K. That will give you a bogus result. What we're interested in is the broadband reflection decay time. And there's been, quite a lot of really, really good work. And if you like, I'll post a link to a paper that's public, which is, God, I've got to remember this, written by a gentleman called Bruno Fazenda, who is professor of acoustics at Salford University, which is probably the UK, one of the UK's top 3 universities for acoustics. And what he looked at was the perceptual effects of modal decay. So looking at reflection decay time at low frequencies. And what they found out was you can have more decay time at low frequencies and it's relatively inaudible. So what we're looking for our reflection decay time is a reasonably flat curve from high frequencies down to lower mid-range that then tilts up
Mhm.
at low frequencies. What we're not looking for is a curve that looks like that. So lots of huge amounts of decay time because you've not looked at where that base energy is going to go at low frequencies, and very, very low decay times at high frequencies because you've put velvet all over the wall, or you've used Alcantara, or you've got big, thick carpet everywhere, and then you've added more high frequency absorption. Generally, if you have carpet with maybe a half-inch pile everywhere in your room, that's all the high frequency absorption you need in that room. Any more high frequency absorption, and you're going to be tilting that high frequency down, and you're going to lose that sense of space and air. We've all been in those rooms. Well, most of us have been in those rooms where you walk into the room and you feel like you've got a head cold. You
Mhm.
feel like the air has been sucked out of the room. What you're hearing is an unbalanced reflection decay time where you've got way, way, way too much absorption at high frequencies. So if your idea of acoustically treating a room is to put absorption over the entire front screen wall and then put 1-inch foam over all the walls and all the ceiling and have a carpet, have you acoustically treated your room?
Yes.
Yep. You've treated it with a massive overdose and your room is now dead. You have acoustically
At least at the
killed.
higher frequencies, yes.
But that's everything, higher frequencies, upper mid-range, you end up with very, very unbalanced sound power.
Yeah.
And when we hear, people look at the frequency response of the speaker, 50 hertz to 20K plus minus 3 dB. Sure, on axis, but we're not just hearing the on axis sound, we're hearing sound power, which is the combination of all of the sound power after having bounced off multiple surfaces. And if you have an unbalanced room, you get the direct sound, which has one frequency response. You then get the reflected sound that has a completely different spectral response. That's not natural.
Nope.
That's And some speakers exaggerate that by having, and Ben talked beautifully about this 3 or 4 weeks ago, by having a very, very poor off-axis response, which you can see on a spinorama. If your speaker has a poor off-axis response, then you've just exaggerated that problem. So again, the thing to do, buy you mic 1, do some measurements. It's so easy. Try taking things out of the room. Try having less absorption. Our philosophy for floors, I'm not going to go into our philosophy for acoustics because A, most of it's proprietary, and B, we haven't got all year. But our acoustic philosophy for floors is generally that we have that meter and a half, if we can, 2 meters out from the screen wall, thin pile, natural fiber, black, flat black, no pattern carpet. That's nothing to do with acoustics. That's pure visual. And the rest of the room, we have wooden floors. And then we're doing the high frequency absorption work around the walls. And we, mostly use speakers with at the front of the room with reasonably controlled dispersion. And for those of you that are about to go, oh, what about floor bounce? Well, yeah, we probably get a bit of SBIR from floor bounce. But that SBIR we get from floor bounce will be, in our mind, and again, pick your philosophy, in our mind, insignificant compared to what we're then getting from the rest of the room, which is a sense of space, a sense of sparkle, a sense of openness, a sense of the room being alive, a sense of the room not crushing the dynamics of the sound being played. There are ways to predict what your reflection decay time is going to be. By far the easiest is something called a Sabine, Sabine calculation. Every acoustic, every product, everything has something called an absorption coefficient. And that absorption coefficient is, at a given frequency, the sound energy that comes in, how much of that gets absorbed versus how much of that gets bounced off. And if you have a piece of 100 mil foam fiberglass or whatever, basically that has an absorption coefficient of 1 for everything above about 5 or 6K, because
Mhm.
it just absorbs everything. And as you go lower down in frequency, that absorption coefficient goes up and up and up and up and up. And this is a key thing with acoustics. Just because you've got 1-inch foam, do you think that's actually doing anything for bass? It's doing nothing at bass. It's just stopping all of your high frequency reflections and causing that really enclosed, dead, oppressive feel to a room. So as part of you do discovery, as part of design, you come up with an acoustic strategy.
Yep.
What am I going to do to manage the acoustics of the room? I urge absolutely everyone. I've got a slightly old version sitting on the shelf. I do need to get the new edition. I urge everyone here to read Sound Reproduction by Dr. Floyd Toole. I don't think this is the first time that's been mentioned. The latest version also has Dr. Sean Olive and who's the third one? Help me out here. The guy that did the modeling on the 4 subwoofers. Anyway, Sound Reproduction. Todd Welty, Dr. Todd Welty, the 3 doctors. By Sound Reproduction by Dr. Floyd Toole, and that is the best grounding on the pragmaticness of small room acoustics. And one of the things Floyd says in there is that for a lot of normally furnished rooms, you have the room treatments of life. You have curtains, you have sofas, you have bookcases, you have bean bags, you have people, you have pot plants. Acoustic treatments, the engineered things that we hang on walls, are for when we have bare rooms. You have concrete or wooden boxes, and inside you're building out the acoustics.
They're
And
fixing issues.
well, kind of, but I don't look at it that way. When you buy some speakers, you're not fixing an issue by buying a speaker. You need a speaker. It's you need an amp, you need a process. Without these things, the system doesn't work. If you have a bare room, well, of course you're going to have issues because your reflection decay time is going to be way too high.
Mhm.
And if you want to read, what is a good reflection decay time to aim for, download RP22. We've got a really good discussion in there. But it's you're not treating something. You should be building it so it's not sick in the
Oh, I
first.
agree. I
These
fully
are
agree.
these are engineered acoustic products, and I wish we'd refer to them like that rather than acoustic treatments, because I just don't like the idea that it's sick in the first place, because everything we do in these rooms, every design and engineering and specification decision we make should be deliberate. We should not be designing for sickness and then fixing it. We should be designing to make it as good as possible. But again, with acoustics, um, you're not generally, most of you aren't amplifier designers, you're not speaker designers, you're not projector designers, you're not processor designers. You buy these things fully formed. You're generally not an acoustics expert. And most integrators, most cinema designers are not acoustic experts. That's not what they do. And if you talk to 10 different acoustic experts, you're probably going to get 12 different answers
Hmm.
for what to do with a room. But again, same old suggestion. You might want Room EQ Wizard, have a play. Start, even do something like, if you have a bathroom with very little in it, measure it, bring a speaker in, measure it, bring a beanbag in, hang a rug over the window. Just see what effect everyday things have in rooms. Then go back to your theater, cinema, private room, whatever you want to call it, and try the same thing. If you have the opportunity of taking acoustic treatments and acoustic products out, don't accept the status quo. Take them out, and once you've got stuff in that's given you as linear as possible reflection decay time from about 125 hertz upwards, you're going to have a tilt from about 200, 125 hertz, depending on the size of the room. But you want a reasonably flat line from there. Once you've got there, then you can think about the nuance. Oh, where should that diffuser go? Should I be absorbing the first reflection? Ben talked about that weeks ago. You can begin to talk about the little bit of nuances, but you can't do that really until you've got the basis of, it's never going to be a completely flat line, but you absolutely don't want that line looking like that.
Yep. Try and mitigate as much as possible in the engineering process. The earlier you can do it, the better the overall end result, in my opinion.
Yep, it's something you need a strategy for during design, and then engineering is, right, how am I going to implement that strategy in the real world? But you need an acoustic strategy. What are you going to do? And the acoustic strategy is going to work in conjunction to what furniture do you have?
It's going to
What
work with everything.
what are the interior design constraints? Are my speakers wonderful off axis, or are they a bit shoddy and there's something I'm going to need to do about? It's like all of these decisions, it's integrated into the whole,
It's a
not
sum of its parts
necessarily
instead of
independent.
everything on its own. Yeah. Well, Peter, anything else to add?
No,
I
happy to
don't
go
wanna
through some questions if you
overwhelm
want.
people with anything. Sorry?
Happy to go through some questions if you want.
There haven't been a ton, but we can look at a couple of them.
So
Brian Cobb asks, "How much of an impact can an entire room fabric wall have on absorption? Would all of that fabric absorb a lot of high frequencies?"
depends on the fabric.
Yep.
One of the most dangerous phrases is acoustic fabric, because a lot of interior designers consider acoustic fabric as fabric that blocks and absorbs sound. So you need to use the phrase acoustically transparent fabric. And the really good acoustically transparent fabrics do absorb a little bit of those really, really high frequencies. I see a lot of rooms where, the professional has said, oh, but the customer demanded Alcantara. Well, okay, but that decision has ruined the room.
Mhm.
You cannot get acoustically transparent Alcantara. You can get Alcantara that has micro perforations, but even that has its issues. So if all of the walls are of a genuinely acoustically transparent fabric, you're probably going to be okay. It's going to have minimal effect. But if it has some absorbance, then yeah, it's going to kill those high frequency reflections and leave you with quite a dull sounding room. One really good test of, is a room over absorbed, is get someone to stand in one corner of the room and have a conversation with them at your normal speaking level, then move to the opposite corner of the room and have the same conversation, but don't raise your voice. And ask them, is this still completely intelligible? Has my voice changed character? Do I need to talk louder? And if they go, no, you don't need to talk louder, your voice sounds pretty much the same as when you're standing in front of me, you've probably done a good job. If all of a sudden your voice sounds a bit muffled and you have to
Mhm.
raise your voice and shout a bit, then you've probably overabsorbed your room.
I agree. What are the benefits of a sub that's capable of playing up to cleanly up to 300 hertz or above?
Ah, great question.
This is a good question that a lot of people don't think about or think matters.
There's a couple of benefits. Firstly, with your auto calibration, your processor is looking for an impulse response for timing. Now, if you consider the way that waves work, if you have a very low frequency, the slope of that wave is very shallow. So it's difficult for the processor to figure out, well, where's the top? Where is exactly the top that I have to time align to? The higher the frequency, the wave gets sharper. So the
Mhm.
top is much more obvious. So if your sub can play high, then your processor is measuring a much broader frequency spectrum and it's getting a much more accurate time alignment. If your subwoofer is of a design that it's basically brick walled at 110 hertz, which some are, your processor is going to get quite a nebulous idea of where that impulse is. The second thing, and the other reason why it's good for things to play up high is filtering. Um, the second you have any kind of filter, be that an acoustic filter or an electrical filter, you're going to introduce group delay. You're going to introduce phase errors. So if your speaker can just play really, really high and it doesn't need a sort of a physical built into the design of the subwoofer filter, then you've just got the electrical filters and you've not put one filter on top of another to
Mhm.
get some nasties. So it's a really, really good thing if your subwoofer can play high.
The other one that I want to add here, and it's not up to 300 hertz, but the part that people don't necessarily think about is your crossover is not a brick wall. And if your sub is only capable of playing up to your crossover, you're probably going to have a bad time. Or you may not realize that you're going to have a bad time. So your sub being able to play well above your crossover point is going to make things less of an issue in both the frequency and time domains. Because it's more of a roll off and on, not a hard wall. But that's a great question. People need to think about these things more instead of everything in a vacuum. Uh, this is another really good one. And this has actually come up quite a bit with people discussing baffle walls, where people are just treating their front wall. And if you really think about it, especially in the discussions that we just had, it's kind of backwards when you do a lot of this and you're removing SBIR and you think about how a speaker has been designed and what it's trying to do, and you're removing a lot of what it's relying on to be effective. So you want to take that for CSO?
Yikes. Um, it's a really, really, really big conversation.
Mhm.
The one of the questions was, and this partly answers it, last wall to treat, what to focus on first. The key here is don't ever have two opposing walls where you have nothing on them, because then you're going to get what's called a flutter echo. And a flutter echo is where sound just bounces between two walls because there's nothing to break it up. With flutter echoes, as long as one of the walls is either absorbative or, actually, what's even better in a lot of situations, diffusive,
Mhm.
because the difference in absorption and diffusion, absorption takes the energy out, diffusion, pure diffusion, of which there's very, very few diffusers that are pure diffusers. There's only one that I know of, which is GUD, it's kind of diffuser worlds, you know, they like their acronyms. There's something called a bad diffuser. Nothing to do with it being bad and ineffectual. Bad is an acronym for binary amplitude diffuser. There's something called a good diffuser, GUD. They are very good. I think it's geometrically uniform or something. Don't quote me on that. And a GUD diffuser, it's patented. There's a manufacturer of them. It is a pure diffuser. It has no absorption. Most diffusers also have some absorptive effect.
It's hard to get
But
around, but yeah.
absorption takes the energy out. Diffusion doesn't remove the energy, it scatters it in multiple directions. So rather than just sound bouncing backwards and forwards between two surfaces, sound will hit the diffuser, the energy will remain, but be scattered. And that gives you a much bigger sense of space, and keeps the energy in the room, which for high frequencies and mid-range is to a certain extent important.
Mhm.
In terms of absorption behind the speaker, if you think about SBIR, as a speaker goes higher in frequency, it does become more directional. So SBIR, depending on the speaker design, is only relevant below a certain frequency. Now, if we take that frequency, you know, I'm going to pull a number out of my ass here. Let's say 600 hertz is probably a good place to start. In order to completely absorb 600 hertz completely, you're going to need quite a stack of absorption. So just putting some 1-inch foam on the wall, will it help 600 hertz? Sure. Will it help 400 hertz? A bit. Will it stop SBIR at 120 hertz? Absolutely not. And if you think SBIR happens at a quarter of the distance of the wavelength between the drive unit and the wall, give you an example. At 100 hertz, the wavelength is 343 divided by, 343 divided by 100. It's going to end up around 0.8 per meter. 100, yeah, 0.8 per meter. I'm getting my own maths the wrong way around. So if you have your front face of your drive unit 0.8 of a meter away from a wall, you're going to get SBIR at around 110, 120 hertz. As you move your speaker closer to the wall, that SBIR frequency gets higher and higher and higher and higher. So there's no one answer to this. It largely depends on the geometry of your speaker. If you've got a very, very deep speaker and you want to eliminate that SBIR, you're going to need much thicker absorption on the walls. If you've got a much shallower speaker, so you're pushing that SBIR higher and higher and higher in frequency, then just having 1 inch of absorption around that speaker is probably a very, very good strategy. You're going to pretty much eliminate most of that SBIR. But you've then got to also think about, if you have that entire wall covered in 1 inch fuzzy stuff, 1 inch foam, that's a lot of high frequency absorption already. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but then it limits how much more high frequency absorption you can have in the rest of the room. So let's say you've got that fuzzy stuff on the front wall and you've got reasonably 3/4 of an inch, reasonably thick pile carpet everywhere in the room. You really don't need any more high frequency absorption. You just don't need more of it. So it's a fuzzy logic kind of answer that you've firstly got to do the engineering and see, are you going to have an SBIR problem? If you have an SBIR problem, you can get that from the distance. That is also going to be a little bit down to the characteristics of the speaker, although, you know, with a speaker with a big enough baffle, not really. It's pretty predictable. Then if you're going to mitigate that SBIR because it's pushed high enough, how thick absorption do you need to completely absorb that? And the physics tells you, again, bit of fuzzy logic necessary here, to completely absorb a wavelength with a velocity absorber, so fuzzy stuff or foamy stuff, you need an absorber a quarter of the wavelength that you're trying to absorb. Do the maths. Can be quite thick. Less thickness than that will do something, but it won't completely absorb it. So it's one of those questions. Is absorption good to have around speakers? Yes. Is it necessarily good to do all of that absorption on the front, have the whole of the front wall covered? Not necessarily. If you can't have anything on the back wall, so let's say you've got interior design constraints, which means that on that back wall, it's just got to be brick, or maybe you're in a room where that's glass, then covering that entire front wall with absorption is probably a good idea,
Mhm.
because then you're mitigating the flutter echo that could be happening between front and back walls. So it's one of these. There is no right answer to any single acoustics question in isolation. You've got to do the maths and look at it as a whole room, totality of the experience calculation.
Yep. I agree. Now, this does change with different types of speakers. I would argue that with things like on walls and in walls, I'd probably want even less, if at all. I mean, a lot of those are relying on boundary interactions to maintain, especially their low frequency output. And you take that away, and you're potentially in for a bad time. So the next question is, would you ideally treat the back wall instead of the front wall?
No, because treating the back wall will do nothing for SBIR.
If you didn't have an SBIR issue, let's say, I guess then you wouldn't need to.
There's this old school, it's not entirely wrong. There's this old school idea of dead end, live end.
Yeah.
So you have the front of the room as a dead end, you have the
Mhm.
back of the room as a live end. And that was very much in Dolby Pro Logic days, where the surround speakers were a mono channel, had two speakers, sometimes dipoles, and they just threw sound all around, and it was all about immersion. And then at the front of the room, you have left, center, right, which is all about nice tight imaging. So if you, and again, you've got to relate this completely every single time down to total absorption in a room. You
Mhm.
can't have too much, because then you kill the room. So if you're thinking about all of this sound that's bouncing around the room, and a lot of people will use ray tracing for this, to actually trace, okay, if you're sitting here, the sound will bounce here, 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 and here. There is a case, I think it's marginal, but there is a case to say, if you want really nice tight imaging from your front speakers, the only sound you want coming from the front of the room is not sound that's bounced around from other speakers,
Sure.
again, bouncing out from the front. The only sound you want coming from the front is the sound being emitted by those speakers. So in that case, the high level kind of thought around dead end, live end sort of still works. So if you're either going to have absorption on the front wall or the back wall, um, I would say put it on the front wall, but then you again, you don't want strong specular reflections from the back wall. And there's a school of thought that says that the back wall between the two rear speakers, that's the perfect place to have a diffuser, which adds its own set of problems, because really deep QRD, quadratic residue diffusers, they can be that deep. They can even be that deep. They have something called a critical distance. So these diffusers have lots of different depths. The idea that it's, as well as scattering in terms of direction, it scatters in terms of phase, that you have a non-linear phase response. Some of the reflections are delayed relative to others, and that's a really good thing to do for a diffuser. The problem is it takes a certain distance from the diffuser reflections to decorrelate. So if you sit too close to one of those diffusers and you shift your head, you actually hear some really weird phasey effects, because those reflections are still discrete specular reflections that haven't decorrelated yet. Um, Again, it's not a always do this
Hmm.
suggestion.
I guess it comes down to you need to think about the entirety or the totality of your room before you make these decisions. Because if you decide, as Peter said, I want a very concise and focused image, that's probably going to dictate not only where you're applying absorption, but also what type of speakers you may want to put up in your front wall, use in your space. Because if you're using absorption, it can create issues for certain types of speakers, at least in my practice or experience, because some speakers rely on that boundary interaction for low end extension, as I said earlier. So if you take that away, you're going to have to reinforce it somewhere.
Another one to look at is you often end up putting front wides where the first reflection from the left and the right and possibly even the center channel is. So if you have a first reflection point, which is where you're putting your front wides,
Hmm.
I would suggest putting, not huge swathes of it, but putting an area of absorption around your front wides. Again, because the sound you want coming from there is the sound that's meant to be coming from there from the front wides, not that first reflection off the left and the right speakers.
How do you feel about absorbing first reflection points?
Um,
A
I'm
lot
not
of times you see people saying you always absorb first reflection points. Or you have that mindset?
one of when we were writing RP22, as you can imagine, the acoustic section,
Hmm.
there were a lot of discussions. And one of the discussions was around first reflection points. And that discussion went on to, okay, in the days of Dolby Pro Logic, where basically everything was encoded in two channels, everything within a certain frequency band sent out the center, everything that was out of phase between the left and the right got sent out the back. It was very, very, very simple encoding. We needed lots of reflections to decorrelate that sound.
Hmm.
As the channel count goes up, we're relying less on room ambiance to give us our ambiance and more on what's actually encoded in the content to give us our spatial cues. So the question was, should our recommendation be that as your speaker channel goes up, speaker channel count goes up, that the advised room reflection decay time goes down, which would kind of make logical sense. You
Hmm.
don't want too many reflections. You actually want the speakers to be delivering the ambience in the room. And we thought and discussed this long and hard. And anecdotally, we thought that to a certain degree makes sense, but not to push it down so low as you're creating these really oppressive rooms. But we didn't have the empirical data to back up the recommendations, so we couldn't include it in a CDO recommended practice. So the answer to your question is there's probably not enough empirical data on that to come up with a hard and fast recommendation. If you read Floyd Toole's sound reproduction, he will say just buy a speaker that has a good power response.
Hmm.
And that first reflection, all that does is it widens the apparent source width.
Yep.
So it gives you the impression that you've got a much bigger room, that you've got a much, much bigger soundstage, which is generally a good thing, except when you've got wide fronts,
Yep.
in which case you want the wide fronts to be producing that width, not your speakers. So in a two-channel setting or where you haven't got wide fronts, I'd just say spec some speakers with fantastic power response. Don't worry about the first reflection and happy days. The first reflection is actually doing you some benefit, as long as it's not too strong, as long as your speakers aren't hard up against the wall.
Yeah.
There's a bit of space. Hard up against sidewalls, there's got a bit of space between the speaker and the wall. Let those first reflections just enhance the apparent source width. But if your speakers have a shonky off-axis power response, or maybe your speakers are one of these speakers that are non-symmetrical, so you've got a line of woofers and a line of tweeters, which means that your left to right dispersion is not symmetrical around the center axis. You know, there are scenarios that you think, well, yeah, actually, I may need to do a bit of ray tracing here and absorb those reflections. But if you do ray tracing, you're in the realms. Again, there's some people that swear by it. It's an approach. We don't do it. You're in the realms of, if you have a high channel count system and lots of seats, to do the ray tracing from every single speaker to every single seat, you are going to have a reflection point basically everywhere in the
Everywhere.
room.
Yes.
And that's kind of the philosophy that we take as a company when we're doing our acoustic designs and manufacturing our acoustic interiors, that we don't necessarily look at ray tracing from every speaker to every seat.
It's too finite.
We just deal with every surface in our very, very unique way. It's not right, it's not wrong, it's just the way that we do it. But the number one thing is try and get as linear reflection decay time as you possibly can, and try and build your room in a way that it's tunable. So when you've built it and you measure it and you go, holy crap, I've got way too much high frequency absorption in here, you can actually take a bit out of the walls and retain some diffusion, take a bit out of the ceiling and retain some diffusion. You're not going to want to take the carpet up. I mean, you know, if you've got a carpet, that's staying, isn't it? But if you have a way that you can make that room tunable, make it tunable.
I agree. We got one more question that I'll address. There's some other ones, but we're running out of time. We've been going for almost 2 hours, and I want to be respectful of Peter's time. So Majek asks, can you comment on angled sidewalls in ceilings? Isn't it built-in diffusion? How do you feel about angles in rooms?
It's not built-in diffusion, it's built-in confusion. Angled walls make things really, really, really unpredictable. If you mean that the room has different angles along its length, there's kind of a geometric pattern. So the walls are basically the room is a rectangular box, but along the walls and ceiling, you have this geometric pattern. Ben did a room like that 4 or 5 years ago, actually won Best Global Cedar Award for it. And that room was basically that design. I think the room was called Triangles. It is a form of kind of diffusion, but it's not really diffusion, because if you think of the wavelengths that you're looking at for diffusion, there is no such thing as a diffuser that is totally broadband. If you have a diffuser with very, very small little diffusion elements, it is going to affect the frequencies around the size of those elements. Big frequency, longer wavelengths are just going to hit it, ignore all the little stuff, and bounce straight off.
Well, I'm correct in saying that a true broadband diffuser would have to be enormous, and it would have to have diffusers on diffusers in order to make it work.
It would be a fractal diffuser.
Yeah.
It would just have this. But yeah, there's no practical way of having a true.
So I think
broadband diffuser.
To bring this more concisely, what most people are going to think is just say a single angle on a ceiling, like you have a sloped ceiling. It's not really a diffuser. You're just changing the geometry and potentially adding more complications to the space.
Yes, you have to have quite severe angles for it to positively affect the modal response of the room. If you think you've got a 1 foot difference in rise between the front and the back of the room, and then you think of what that foot is as a percentage of the wavelength, your wavelength at 20 hertz is 17 meters, which is what, 54 feet.
Yeah.
A 1 foot difference is just going to mean you're going to have some really weird, unpredictable stuff going on. So I would much rather, and I think most acousticians these days would much rather have a predictable shoebox shaped room.
Yes.
And especially with today's active acoustics that have just changed everything. You know, I think a future episode
We talked
could
about that. Yeah.
could be, you know, an episode just talking about active acoustics and the effect that that has on room design, especially with active acoustics. You want the room predictable to begin with, and then let the active acoustics sort out the nuance.
Yep.
If you have an unpredictable starting point, it makes active acoustics and generally everything a lot harder.
Yep. I agree. I fully agree. All right. Well, Peter, anything you want to say or add or anything of the like before we close up? We've been going for 2 hours, and I know people enjoy having you on.
Follow the engineering, don't follow the product. When you've done the room, measure, listen, adjust, buy a U mic 1, or even better, inexpensive 4 mic rig so you can do some spatial averaging, and just play with it. You know,
Mhm.
see what the effects are of different settings on the process. Get buy get some bean bags. Just go to IKEA or just a cheap store and get some bean bags. Get some chairs or step ladders, depending how high they are, and put these bean bags at the first reflection points of your system. Listen, you know, listen for the effects, measure for the effects, look at the impulse response, look at where all the little specular spikes are that show probably the strong early first reflections. Try putting the beanbags on the floor, see if the floor bounce things disappear, see what effect that has on the total room reflection decay time. Just experiment. You know,
Yeah.
the beauty these days is that 15 years ago this test equipment was tens of thousands of dollars. Now it's $80 for a Umite 1 and Room EQ Wizard, and I don't
Mhm.
think there's any excuse. And you can find some really profound stuff. Yeah, you need to be really good at driving it to figure out the nuance, but there's some amazing YouTube videos on the AV Nirvana website, which is where Room EQ Wizard's hosted. There's some fantastic discussions. There's some fantastic tutorials. Just work your way through there. Measure, listen, adjust. Measure,
Yep.
listen, adjust, and trust the engineering and trust companies that give you raw engineering data and learn how to use it. Brand names, whatever. You know,
I
our hard and fast company rule is the same as Ben's. Funny that, given we're the same company, but that is we won't spec stuff unless we've got engineering data on it, because during engineering you've got to make predictions, and the product has got to meet the engineering requirement.
Yeah.
So, you know, these questions, what's better, this manufacturer or that manufacturer? I don't care. We have, you know, sorry, manufacturers, I've got a lot of great manufacturer friends, but apart from one manufacturer, we have almost zero brand loyalty. We tend to use a lot of the same stuff, project in, project out, only that, well, they give us the data and it's really scalable and it's
Mhm.
great form factor and it's reliable and we get great support. But we don't, you know, I'm not buying that stuff because he's the person that takes me out to the best dinners. Sorry, mate, that doesn't help. We're
Mhm.
buying that stuff because we think it's bloody great and we've got the data to prove it. So trust the data, trust the engineering, measure, listen, adjust. And, you know, even if you're doing it for yourself, go through that discovery, design, engineering with specification at the end. It'll save you money. You'll get much better value and you'll be getting the maximum possible out of that lovely equipment you buy.
At the end of the day, though, do not shy away from getting in the sandbox and playing yourself. There is no substitute for the learning that comes from playing. That's why it's important for kids, and it doesn't change for us as adults. Get that REW, get REW, get a UMIC 1. Even if you have no idea what you're doing, you will be amazed at how fast you pick things up. Even if it's just you playing with no videos, you'll be amazed at just moving things around, little things in your room, adjusting things, putting more people in, doing the little things that Peter said that do not take a lot of money can have huge implications and changes on your space. And you may find that, hey, I thought I liked this and now it's totally different. And you may find that it costs you just a few dollars or nothing at all to make massive improvements on your space.
And I love the idea that there's now, you know, it's happened in the States first. I expect it'll be global. That there are these little communities of enthusiasts in cities that arrange to go around to each other's houses and listen to stuff, and you know, M Wave and all these opportunities you have to hear systems. When I used to run a very big company, my instruction to all the people that we paid for them to go to a show was, you will go to every single active demo. And in that active demo, you will make a note. This is what I liked. This is what I didn't like. And for the stuff I didn't like, this is what I do to improve it.
Yeah.
It's not just, oh, I don't like that. Oh, great, whatever. You've wasted your time. It's, well, I don't like that. I don't like that because, and in the context of this room, this is how I'd look to improve it.
Yeah.
And you can even go one step further than that and say, well, this is what I don't like. This is why I don't like it. And if I measured the room, this is what I think I'd see. And that's really cool, because the second you understand those basic measurements, you can catch gross errors really, really, really fast. And stop yourself just going down a time vampire of a rabbit warren of buying cables and changing stuff, when actually maybe the only thing you needed to do was change the time alignment between your speakers and your subwoofer.
Yep. I agree. Well, we'll wrap it up from there, just to be respectful again of Peter's time. I know I could talk to Peter all day, but again, this episode
And
was
I am on
on
holiday.
Oh, well, maybe I don't want to talk to you all day.
That's fine. I'm on holiday, but I still want to be here. That's got to say
Well,
something.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us and helping educate and pull some of the, you know, unknowns away from people so they have a better understanding and are more comfortable about doing this themselves. Again, this was Common Myths and Misconceptions on AV and Home Theater. Peter, thank you again for
Pleasure.
coming to join us, and it's always a pleasure to have you on. We will be back maybe this weekend. I don't know if Jonathan and I will have time this weekend. He's been on vacation, and Ben will be back next week on Monday. Not sure what that topic is going to be, but if you guys have suggestions for topics and conversations you want to have in the future, drop them in the comments of this video, not in the chat, in the comments of the video, and we can address them in the future. Thanks again for everybody for coming out and enjoying this content. Hopefully you learned something. I know I do every time I have a guest on. That's why I do it. I want to learn. But stay safe out there. Enjoy that home theater journey, and we will see you guys in the next episode. Have a good one,
Cheers,
everyone.
everyone.